Hey everybody. This is going to be a quick one for you today, but Trent Horn came out with a video yesterday called Marian Dogma Refutes Muslim and Secular Critics of the Virgin Birth. When I saw the title, my interest was piqued. I thought, Muslims and secular critics, is this perhaps something to do with like textual criticism of like a virgin birth? Does this have to do with like the potential mistranslation of that word alma or something like that? Turns out that I was pretty far off. But an interesting video nonetheless. The video that Trent put out is in response to a lot of the debate that has been going on recently between Christians and Muslims. So, Inspiring Philosophy has been debating Muslim apologists on child marriage. And I'm very happy to say that Trent's video was, vehemently opposed to child marriage. Yay, okay. Low bar to clear, but we cleared that bar. We're in agreement. Child marriage is bad. Cool. But the word secular was in the title as well. Marian Dogma Refutes Muslims and Secular Critics of the Virgin Birth. So my assumption on the virgin birth secular critic was that, it's not possible to get pregnant while being a virgin, at least for most normative definitions of the word virgin or something like that. That's not what the video was about, though. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play some of the video and then I'm going to respond to it. Now, I will say that I found this video a little bit confusing in the way that it was presented. All that being said, let's jump into the video and I'm going to respond to select portions of the video. I'm going to go through the comment section at the end, and then I'll just add a quick conclusion and we'll be done. All right, let's head over to the video. This first section is called Minimum Age Set by Canon Law.
A similar objection has been raised against Catholicism because canon law sets the minimum age of marriage for men at 16 and for women at 14.
Pause. So what is this similar objection? It's the similar objection that Islam allows for child marriages, and not only allows it, but sets it up as something that could be emulated. So, the Prophet married somebody when she was 6 or whatever. And so Trent's saying that a lot of people rightly point out child marriage in Islam as something that's bad, but then they'll point to something like the Virgin Mary. She got pregnant when she was 14, according to tradition, and Joseph was 45 or something like that. So a lot of so Trent's argument is here. So Trent is saying some people levy similar arguments. They say, hey, child marriage in Islam is bad. And if child marriage is just straight up bad, then the child marriage that's presented to us in Matthew and Luke is also bad. So Trent says, and Trent's saying that canon law says that the minimum age of marriage for boys is 16 and for women is 14. Now, I would love just a straight up condemnation of this age, because that's disgusting. That's child marriage. That is child marriage. Canon law allows for child marriage. Let's hear how Trent deals with this problem.
Though Pope Francis has talked about raising the minimum age for women to 16, but so far he hasn't moved on that suggestion. In the U.S., though, marriage for older teenagers is usually defended on the grounds of making it possible for a teen girl who becomes pregnant to marry the father of her child so they have...
So Pope Francis might raise the age from 14 to 16 for women. Yay. Still not high enough. Still not high enough. But the church does nothing fast, and this would be a step in the right direction. And then Trent starts going into defending child marriage in the United States. Well, not defending it, but laying out arguments for why some people might defend it. I don't know if I understand this point. I don't think that a 14-year-old should get married just because she's pregnant. And Trent goes on to say a little more stuff right here.
More social and economic stability. But I think it's fair to debate whether these marriages really are in the best interests of everyone involved, or whether they do more harm than good.
Exactly. So Trent wasn't making the argument that this is good. He was saying that this is how some people argue that it's good. And I agree with Trent. I don't think that a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old getting married is going to increase their economic stability. I think that a 14 and a 16-year-old are going to be extremely economically unstable unless they are living with their parents. And I don't think that their marriage is going to change their economic stability at all.
Because even the church will not marry people if they're just getting married for a shotgun wedding or because someone got pregnant.
Are you sure about that? Are you sure about that? So Trent obviously doesn't know this about me, but I had a little bit of a shotgun wedding in the Catholic Church. My engagement was just over the line of how long an engagement needs to be for the parish priest to not need bishop's approval. So for a wedding, for an engagement to be less than 4 months, the bishop has to approve that wedding, and that's to like prevent abuse. But the rule is that it's just, at least in the diocese that I grew up in, the rule is that it has to be like 4 different months. So I like got engaged at the end of June or July or something like that. So it was like July, August, September. It was July. So I got engaged at the end of July and I got married at the beginning of October. So it was like 3 months and a day, but that counts as 4 months. So we didn't need bishop approval. This was the shortest engagement possible without needing bishop approval. And this wedding was evident to everybody at the time that it was not something that me or my girlfriend at the time wanted. We were getting married because I was in the middle of deconstructing my faith. I was moving far away. I was moving with her. And I got married to essentially appease my religious community. Everybody knew it was a shotgun wedding. People would hug me and cry and saying like, oh, you're doing the right thing, with tears in their eyes because they felt bad for me because they knew that I didn't want to do this. So shotgun weddings very much so do happen, Trent. Very much so. They happen to me. So this is just not the case that shotgun weddings don't happen.
You have to be able to freely consent. So in many cases, the church, even for adults, will not grant the sacrament of marriage if people are just getting married because of a pregnancy.
It wasn't a pregnancy for us, but I could see somebody in my situation, except that it's pregnancy instead of just deconstruction of their religion, I could see the church marrying them. We're going to jump ahead in the video now to where Trent has titled this chapter, The Immaculate Conception Response. And this is kind of my major gripe with the gist of the video. Let's let Trent speak and then I'll respond.
God is not a rapist in any way. God would never make it be the case that Mary agreed to him impregnating her in order, even in a slight way, for her to avoid a divine punishment or hasten a divine reward.
So God is not a rapist. God would never do this. God couldn't do that. Okay, Trent. How is this not begging the question? So, what are you responding to, first of all? So this video tries to respond to both Muslims and secular critics, right? If we are responding to secular people might point to this, the whole virgin birth story, as an example of God not being all good. Like, hey, look, God sent an angel to appear to a 14-year-old and said, like, hey, you're going to be pregnant. And go read Luke, right? It's not a question. It's like hey, Mary, what's up? You're going to be pregnant. Mary's like, how? I've never even, been with a man. And the angel says, it's God. God's going to make you pregnant. And Mary says, your will be done. That's it. There's no discussion about it. It's ambiguous about whether or not Mary was like enthusiastic or anything like that. And the angel does call her full of grace and blessed and stuff like that. So, I don't think that this argument is particularly strong from like the secular trying to prove that God is evil or anything like that. But I don't think that Trent's response here is really good, because notice what Trent just said. The secular critic says, hey, look, God isn't all good because of the Immaculate Conception. Trent's response is, no. God is all good. So the Immaculate Conception is actually good. Like, we're going to kind of invent some additions to the story found in Luke chapter 1. In order to make the Immaculate Conception more palatable, let's see exactly how Trent improves the story.
God must have made it so that when he asked Mary through Gabriel to bear the Son of God, Mary was in a position where she knew saying no would not displease God. Her no would not have represented any disordered desire, and it would not have contradicted God's will.
So, because God is all good, Mary must have been able to say no when she was 14 and a freaking angel appears to her. This is begging the question. If the secular critic here is pointing to the Immaculate Conception as something that would demonstrate that God is not all good, and your response is, no, but because God is all good, therefore the Immaculate Conception is not an example of God not being all good, that is literally the begging the question fallacy. I feel like I'm missing something here because this is like so like blatant that I think I'm misunderstanding something here. I get into it in the comments in a little bit and Trent actually responds to me, or perhaps Kyle. It's impossible to tell. But this to me right now seems like it's a really clear example of begging the question.
Must have been in a position to know she was free to say no so that she could truly be free to say yes. But in order to be in that position, in order for Mary to know that her no is not a disordered desire that contradicts God's will, she would need to be free from any disordered desires.
So again, in order to set this up, we need to make extra assumptions. So instead of just pointing to this as an example of the God of the New Testament not being all good, we're just going to beg the question. We're going to say, no, but God is all good. Therefore, Mary has all these extra attributes. Attributes that are just simply not found in the text of the New Testament. Attributes that are, sure, later traditions, early traditions even, but it's just not found in the text of the New Testament. So if somebody is pointing to this God of the New Testament and saying, like, look, like, this is bad. Like, this is a real problem for the God's all goodness. And you say, no, but because God is all good, this is actually not a problem for God's all goodness. So that's just begging the question. Trent doesn't spend a whole lot of time talking about secular responses in this video. And I think that's why I'm having such like a hard time understanding this video, is because I don't think that this video was made for me. But he does address the secular response in one brief moment here.
When it comes to secular critics, I find their objections to be hypocritical, since many of them believe teenagers are mature enough to have abortions or choose their own genders. Even still, the Immaculate Conception not only distinguishes Mary's pregnancy from the teen pregnancies defended by some Muslim apologists, it distinguishes it from the teen pregnancies and marriages condemned by secular critics, because an all-powerful God can make it so that Mary's dignity is not harmed in any way by being part of the incarnation.
That's it. So first, I'll just say that this is, again, question begging, where the secular critic says, hey, look, God isn't good because he's getting a 14-year-old pregnant. And Trent's last response there is, no, God is all good. Therefore, God's getting a 14-year-old pregnant is good. Like, God would have made it good somehow. That's question begging. But then the hypocritical response, first of all, somebody could just say, yeah, secular people are hypocritical. Both are bad, right? So a non-secular person could just say, yeah, secular people are hypocritical. Now, I consider myself secular in as much as I think that religion and government should be separate. I'm not religious myself, so in that sense, I'm secular. And I don't support those things that Trent mentioned. Not for teenagers. So, Trent, what about me? What about secular people like me who just don't hold those views that you described as hypocritical? What's the response there? I mean, all of a sudden, is this like a serious problem for God's all goodness? I don't know. Trent doesn't respond to that in this video. Trent's only response to the secular is hey, you might be hypocritical. What if you're not? What if you don't hold those views? Trent doesn't go there. Okay, let's look at some of the comments. So here is that comment that I left, where I laid out exactly what I went over in this video, how I think that this is question begging. And I did note, just trying to be, as... I know that I'm an idiot, but sometimes I don't express that I'm an idiot in text. So I tried to say, like, I'm not positive that this is right, but it looks to me like this is question begging. You can read the whole comment here, but I actually got a response from Trent himself. So first, just to go through some other ones, people were saying, well, yeah, but God is by definition good. And I'm saying, so that is question begging. Like, if somebody's saying, no, this God is not all good, here's an example. And you say, well, no, this example is not an example of God not being all good because God is all good. That is precisely question begging. So a couple other comments. Patrick responded. I'm friends with Patrick in like Discord chats and stuff. Let's see. Trent responds saying, I'm not saying the skeptic is wrong simply because God is good. So I'm not begging the question, says Trent. I'm saying God's goodness is not impugned by the skeptic's argument here because through his omnipotence, God made it so that Mary's dignity and free will were not harmed or impeded through the incarnation, primarily through the graces that she received in her immaculate conception. My point here is that this argument is unfounded. It's not found in the texts of the New Testament. And anybody who wants to forward this argument is assuming God's all goodness. Like, oh, the graces that Mary received is a result of God's all goodness. That's how we preserve God's all goodness. Wait a minute. That's still just begging the question. Like, you're still just begging the question. You're saying, no, I'm not saying it's because God's all good. I'm saying that through God's omnipotence, God made it so that Mary's dignity was preserved. What's preserving Mary's dignity, though? God's all goodness. So that still is begging the question. We can look more, but truthfully, it's a whole bunch of Catholics still kind of just begging the question. There's one Catholic making the argument that 14 is below consent is a modernist error. So yeah, modern people are just wrong. 14-year-olds are totally ready to be pregnant. That sounds very familiar to me. So I thanked Trent for their response. That's Kyle and Trent. But I said that I'm still struggling here for exactly the reasons that I just laid out. It still seems to be that this is question begging. And then the conversation kind of just devolves into textual criticism, which is fine. I love textual criticism. I'm like 30 comments deep in this section. But you can read it here. I go through the Greek from Luke chapter 1, and I argue that it's not found in the text anywhere. So all of this kind of like addition of like Mary's dignity being preserved is extra biblical, and you're assuming God's all goodness in order to say that Mary's dignity is preserved. So you are question begging. That is my whole point. You can see that it keeps on going and going and going, and we don't really get anywhere. It's all just textual criticism. The only thing that I want to add here is some people looked like they were trying to make an argument that when the angel says, "Hail, full of grace" to Mary in Greek, he's using this Greek word that means, it's one word that means full of grace, and that this word is in the past perfect tense, and the past perfect tense implies that something was done perfectly and completely. So Mary's not just full of grace, she's perfectly and completely full of grace. And I argue that's reading just way too much into the grammar. The past perfect tense of a verb does not imply that something was done perfectly. In English, past perfect would look like this: had, verb ending in ed. So to jump, the past perfect tense of to jump is had jumped. If I had jumped, that doesn't mean that I jumped perfectly and completely. It just means that I jumped and then I stopped jumping before something else in the past started happening. So I had jumped before I started running. That just means that I finished my jumping and then I started running, but the starting was still in the past. Like, I'm not starting to run right now. I started running after I had jumped. Same thing here. It's just a past perfect form of the verb, meaning full of grace. It doesn't mean perfectly and completely full of grace. It just means like, hello, Mary, who had been full of grace. But it also, depending on Greek grammar, it might be a vocative noun, which means person filled with grace. So, but either way that you look at it, you're not getting who had been perfectly and completely filled with grace. You're getting hail, full of grace. You might even translate this as like blessed one. You might translate it as just holy one, like, hey, holy person, hey, blessed person. So that's really it. I just think that we're looking way too far into the grammar here when we try to get all of that out of there. And that's pretty much it. So Trent, I disagree with the main thrust of this video, maybe, but maybe not. If the main thrust of this video is kind of more on the Muslim side and less on the secular side, then yeah, I'm with you, Trent. Child marriage is bad. Whether Muslims do it or non-Muslims do it, child marriage is bad. But I just think that the vast majority of this video was dedicated to the Muslim part, not to the secular part. And secular was in the title. Secular seems to be more of an afterthought in the video. And I think that you're begging the question when you're arguing against the secular critic in this way. Maybe I misunderstand. If I do, let me know in the comments down below. And thanks for watching, everybody.